Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. We're having trouble with the connection here. Last week, I thought it was due to the weather because, we are on a satellite type thing. But the weather shouldn't be the problem now. At any rate, we're just dropping back and punting here and recording on the iPhone. So hopefully we can get this problem resolved. So it's actually quite interesting because last week I was going to do a podcast on, how to really learn from a true spiritual master. And of course, first step to that is how to find a real spiritual master. And that's a whole podcast in and of itself. And it becomes problematic. Actually, after I tried to record it and it didn't work last week, I was at the temple also. I just brought it up with Panditji, and he was just saying it's Kali Yuga, So how can people find a real spiritual master, or how would they know it? Because it's Kali Yuga, and it's the way people think. It's their value system, But, and that was essentially the gist of that whole podcast. You're not looking for a spiritual teacher that aligns with your preconceived notions or your idealized notions. It's not a social event. It's not about having, when he speaks or she speaks, it touches a place within you, because it's more about, what place is that within you? Is it superficial emotions or just a logic stream, or is it really, and here's the gist of this podcast today, which I'm kind of amalgamating the two. And that is, or does it facilitate your connection with a deeper knowing, the deepest knowing that exists within you? I was driving by that church I like to tell you about sometimes. They put up a little posters, bulletin board, whatever. And this most recent one said, let's see if I can remember it. God loves everyone, even the worst of the worst. And the point of that really is that at the depth of every person's being is divinity, perfection. They could be really confused on the surface and do terrible things. But if you can find your way through all of that confusion on the surface in their belief systems and their identities and their limitations and their stress, really, at the depth of their being is divinity. And to varying degrees, we all have different levels of identity and preconceived notions and stresses. And those things, really preclude the ability to really discern and to really find a true spiritual master. So it's kind of like a paradox of double bind there, isn't it? There's that one saying, I think it's Chinese, says better looking a long time for the right master than any time at all with the wrong one. It's just a dilemma, So amalgamating that unresolvable dilemma, you could say, with this week's podcast, Conceive the Universe. And when I was thinking about this podcast, before I decided to amalgamate the two, someone was asking me about reading Vedic literature and how to get the most out of it, something like that. And then everybody, I think, has the concern, well, I don't understand all this. There are all these different gods and the different 10 aspects of Mother Divine and yada, yada, all these different incarnations of Vishnu. How do I put all that together? How do I understand that? And we can dance around that all we want. And it's good, I mean, it's an exercise in reflection. What does that mean? And what are the different incarnations of Vishnu? Or it says Ganesh is the removal of obstacles and the Lord of categories. And how do we make sense of that, Or do we even make sense of it? I think oftentimes, people might say, well, I'm going to memorize this and memorize that fact and memorize this fact and all these things out of the Veda about who Ganesh is, for example. And then I'll be more spiritual. And if I get enough of that information and amalgamate all that information into my own consciousness, then I could be a spiritual teacher myself. And that's not the way it works. And that's why I said the title of this podcast, Conceive the Universe. And I like the word, I thought about the word conceived because, that implies, having a baby, has other meaning, but nevertheless, I realized just how perfect that was, because it is kind of like having a baby, because what happens is that you use the Vedic literature, you read the Vedic literature, you reflect, you ponder about it, and that can touch a deeper place inside. It can touch the deepest place inside. If you can let it, it's then the previous podcasts, looking in the mirror. Can you look in the mirror and see what's really there? Not really, but do your best. And then you ask yourself, why am I resonate with this teaching or this viewpoint on what a particular verse in the Veda means? You could say, it's not about facts. It's not about memorizing the 1,000 names of Vishnu, for example, which is great, but there's something greater. And that's awakening to the inner depth, the inner truth, the inner reality, the inner meaning, which is more of a concept, a feeling, than a fact. And it's not an emotional feeling. It's the finest feeling level. It transcends what people normally think of as their feelings and their emotions, and even their thoughts. Thoughts are a function of the intellect. You can justify anything with the intellect. So, for example, that's why it's important to have a basic framework for how the universe works, how the manifestation of existence works, how all of that works, what all of that is. And from there, then when you read something like, Lord of Ganesh is the Lord of categories. Now you have a context. Okay, how does that fit into my greater understanding of the fundamental mechanic of existence? And I've talked about that at length, Consciousness is the only thing that exists, the field of pure consciousness. Consciousness becomes conscious of itself, perceives its other. Duality is born. Consciousness becomes those two things. The third thing is born. Then a fourth cascades out as consciousness keeps interacting with itself. And what do you create? You create a very, it's like a crystalline structure. That's why, what is the 9th word of Rig Veda? I think it's Ratna. It means crystal, gemstone. It's all crystalline, and it's created out of that. So there's a structure there. And within structures, it's inherent that you find what? You find categories. In set theory, you have sets and subsets and all like that. But the idea is that there's a particular value contained within the absolute, which is categories, viewing it all as categories, understanding it from that perspective. And as I've said, everything has a personified correlate. So that personified correlate to those categories, the personification of that as a being is Ganesh. And that's what it means when we say Ganesh is the Lord of categories, you see. It's inherent in the very structure and nature of existence. And so the more we understand in a conceptual way, really, the nature and structure of existence, then the more deeply it facilitates a deeper look and a deeper understanding of all these different attributes of all the different gods. But see, it's so extremely profound and exquisite, because it says, that a life, something like, 10,000 lives of a human being is, one life of this God, and 2 million lives of a human being is one life of this God. And that's the thing. What does that mean? And then it begs the question, well, what is a day in the life of one of those gods like? What do they do all day long? But you see, then we get sidetracked because we're thinking in terms of what we think of as a day. And we're confusing it with the deeper meaning of what a day in the life of a God is, And at some point, it's good to keep in mind that the human mind itself is not capable of comprehending many of those things. And fortunately, to get enlightened, you don't have to. Enlightenment is an interesting thing, because as you explore these things and you start to understand them from a deeper, more profound, more significant conceptual framework, it moves you closer and closer to that depth within your being that is, in fact, the underlying basis of all existence. Meditation, of course, is the most powerful tool for this, proper meditation. There are all kinds of meditations out there. Even meditations prescribed by Maharishi Patanjali, after it's been read and reread and hashed and rehashed, it ceases to be what he was teaching. It's that subtle, But ultimately what happens, it's a very interesting thing, is that as you get closer, I compare it to like a docking station. Some of you have heard me use this analogy, where you're in a spaceship in outer space and there's the mothership, and you're trying to dock into the mothership. The mothership would represent, I guess, the absolute, the transcendent, enlightenment, if you will. And as you get closer and closer, you start to gravitate to it. And at some point, you get so close that the gravitational pull is so strong that boom, 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 and eventually you click. It's like you plug into the docking station. And that can be likened to enlightenment. And once that happens, your understanding of everything is different than what you thought it was. It's like, I thought I knew what karma was, and now I didn't. And now, everything changes. It's like taking the sock that's inside out and turning it right side out. And it's like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this is what a sock really is. It's kind of like that. So a real spiritual teacher is somebody that facilitates that process. And those type of teachers are very few and far in between. And even if they're there, even if you are in the presence of a real enlightened master, where do you go with that? Well, the tendency is to go with your preconceived notions, what you expect a spiritual master to be like. Oh, it's supposed to be all airy and fluffy, and they're supposed to blow in white robes and flowing with flowers and the whole thing. I'm not saying an enlightened master would never do that, but I am saying that that's not the prerequisite. And if somebody does that, then therefore they are an enlightened master. But you see, it just shows how easily people get sucked into following somebody who's not the real deal. So you have to reflect, and you ponder, and you keep in mind that it's not about facts, it's not about understanding, it's not about emotional indulgence. It's about conceiving the universe from within your own self. And I've done podcasts talking about the Atma and how you conceive the universe. I mean, in a very literal birthing kind of a sense. It all emerges from within your own Atma and outward. We're not a small part of it, we are it. And that's a whole lecture, but that's it in a nutshell, you see. And so a spiritual master facilitates your ability to, in time, realize and experience that directly. It's all coming from inside of you. You are it. But if you're looking in a mirror, that's not going to do the trick, because you're going to project onto it. See, we don't perceive, we project, huh? Well, Scotty, I know you have to type because we're having troubles with our system here, but does all that make sense? Or is there anything you wanted to add, Scotty? Or are we good to go? There's so much more I could say, you know. I think that might be enough for now, actually. Let's leave it there. And I'll give you an opportunity to reflect upon it, but I think it's enough. So if I can figure out how to do this, I will sign out, and we will talk with you again next week. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll get all of this straightened out.